So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Jurch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the Center for Policy and Practice at the Association of Community College Trustees. Thank you very much for joining us for this discussion today to talk about a topic that has multiple application, and because of the recent passing of the Workforce Pell legislation, is even more important in its impact on community colleges. This webinar is part of a series on non-credit data, so be on the lookout for future announcements. ACCT is also hosting a series of webinars around Workforce Pell and how best to prepare. And since our topic today is dealing with data and Workforce Pell, it seems appropriate to let you know that was coming as well. Before I get started, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session, and the recording will be sent to the registrants as well as posted on our website. I will be monitoring the chat function, so if you would like to ask a question, please use that. So let's go ahead and get started. So non-credit education and non-degree credentials have been around for a while and are growing in popularity, particularly with the increased focus on credential attainment, but data collection and analysis have not kept pace. The Education and Employment Research Center at the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University received funding from the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics within the National Science Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and the Strada Education Foundation to foster the development of a more robust data infrastructure using three key strategies: generating research to advance the field, creating a taxonomy to guide data collection efforts, and creating learning opportunities to share successful practices. I am very excited to be joined by two key leaders at the Research Center who are going to share some information about how the work they have been doing and the lessons learned from one of their projects, the State Noncredit Data Project, relate to the recently passed Workforce Pell legislation. They will use data learned from 8 partner states to describe some of the assets and gaps in state non-credit data that will have a bearing on pre-identifying potentially eligible programs and discuss a series of recommendations about how to move towards successful Workforce Pell implementation. Michelle Van Noy is the director of the Education and Employment Research Center and has more than 20 years of experience conducting research on education and the workforce focused on credentials, community colleges, and connections between higher education and the labor market. Before joining EERC, Dr. Van Noy conducted research at Community College Research Center at Columbia University and Mathematica Policy Research. Mark D'Amico is a professor of higher education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and he co-leads the State Noncredit Data Project in partnership with the Education and Employment Research Center. Mark is a past president of the Council for the Study of Community Colleges, an affiliated council of the AACC, and brings over 30 years of experience in higher education. Thank you both for being here. And I think it's a great place to start if you would be for you to give an overview of that State Noncredit Data Project, and then talk about how it relates to the Workforce Pell legislation that was recently passed. I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Hey, thank you so much, Steve, for having us here today for this opportunity to share this work that Mark and I have been doing for a number of years, and we're pleased to have this opportunity to share this and to be able to inform this conversation about Workforce Pell. So, this is something that we've been both Mark and I have been studying this topic for a long time, thinking about non-credit education, and we have been tracking the importance and the increasing relevance of non-credit education for quite some time. We know that there's a lot of individuals that are interested in pursuing non-credit education. We know there's a lot of state investments in non-credit education. We're seeing that's increasing with different funding formulas and different funding programs that states are putting out. And so this is already an environment where there's been so much interest in non-credit. And we know some estimates from the American Association of Community Colleges tell us that there's close to 4 million students enrolled in non-credit education, but we know from our research that it's really hard to pin down those numbers precisely, and that's sort of been a foundational problem and challenge that we've been tackling and trying to get a handle on. Before I get into telling you a little bit about the project, I'll just put this in the context of sort of what's going on nationally in the narrative there. We know that part of why this is so important right now is just that so many students are looking for different ways to prepare for a job, or advance in their jobs without going on for a longer term kinds of educational programs. And so non-credit really serves a distinct need, and that's becoming an increasing kind of part of the national narrative. But we know that there's been sort of inconsistent funding from state to state, but now with Workforce Pell, things are going to be changing possibly. And so, it's going to be, really important to see and to guide how states seek to implement that, and institutions and all the actors that are involved in that process. We'll get into that more. But just to also situate this too, and what we know from our current research, the research that we've done collectively, have done with others, we know that there's fairly modest labor market outcomes from short-term workforce training. But some of the research that, I've done with folks at ERC and many other people have done, show that there's that the outcomes are highly variable from these programs, and it varies a lot based on industry and local labor market. And so that's, a topic for much more discussion, is kind of looking at those outcomes. I should mention Mark and I are also part of this Non-Credit Research Collaborative, which is a group of other researchers, including Peter Barr and Dee Zhu, who've been doing a lot of research on non-credit education. And we do have some resources with that group on noncreditresearch.org, which is a place where you can find out more about those outcomes and different kinds of research there. So just kind of pointing out some of those research resources that are probably helpful in this current climate. But, in addition to sort of looking at the labor market outcomes, one of the challenges, and that's going to be a significant challenge with Workforce Pell coming, is that very few students we've seen based on research actually make the transition to credit-bearing programs. So that holy grail of stackability continues to be a challenge. And the research that shows that it hasn't been something that's typically happened. And so it's a question, though. It's something that we need to better understand, and understand the circumstances under which that happens, or it doesn't happen, and why. And so this comes down to our foundational problem, which is what we're really going to dig into today, which is the data. We would like to have data so we can better understand the trajectories of students into the labor market or into further education. But we know that there's very limited data, especially on things like demographics and credential attainment and labor market outcomes. And that's something that we've seen in our research, and others have also documented. So that leads us into sharing about our project that we're going to dig into today in more detail. And that's the State Noncredit Data Project. So just a little bit of background on, how we came to this project. So as I said, Mark and I have been studying this topic for a very long time. And through our time, we've been on a couple of iPads technical review panels where people have talked about possibly adding a measure of non-credit. And, on the most recent one that was several years ago, everyone was saying, gosh, we don't know how to do this. No one's done this. No one has any definitions or measures of non-credit data. And, I started looking around and like, well, there are some states that are doing this. And it was particularly, in state community college systems where some of these data had been collected and non-credit was available. And so, we came up with this project that got some funding from the National Science Foundation to look at a few states, Iowa, Louisiana, and Virginia, that had non-credit data. And we began to document what those data were. And we, kind of took an inventory of that. We just focused on understanding at the program level what they were collecting. And through that initial examination, we decided to look across those states and begin to build out a taxonomy with some common definitions of data elements across those states, and to kind of work towards synthesizing what data were possible to collect and important to collect on non-credit. From those three states and that initial taxonomy, we expanded the project with funding from Gates and from Strata, and we were able to bring in some states that were at different stages of development in their non-credit data. So those included Maryland, New Jersey, Oregon, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And these states all varied in their sort of state of non-credit data collection. Some were more advanced, some were just beginning, some had data and hadn't looked at it in years. And so we were really working with them to really just try and understand what was there and what they were trying to do. And through that, we documented, again, the data that they had. And we updated the data taxonomy to include more of the measures that these different states had. We also expanded our view beyond community colleges and higher ed to include one state Department of Labor that was in New Jersey to try and look at some of the data that they had been capturing on non-credit programs, which really helped to expand out the taxonomy, the second version, which we released earlier this year. And so that's the research that's been really foundational for the project. Also, throughout that time, another really important element of our project has been a national learning community that we created with our states to really share out what we were learning from our research and bring states together to share about what they were doing. And so we have quarterly learning community meetings to talk about the data and talk about our research, and those are open to anybody. In our more recent round of the project, we've created specialized state working groups where we have state leaders who have been working in non-credit data, bringing their work together and sharing practices and really kind of having a more hands-on kind of look at what they can do to improve their data, working together and sharing the knowledge within states. And those are for states only, but we do have those operating now. We are continuing to do research as well. So we're expanding, looking for additional research partnerships, really trying to expand out that data taxonomy to bring in other perspectives from other kinds of entities that might collect non-credit data, even beginning to look at the four-year sector a little bit, possibly apprenticeship, additional departments of labor, and other kinds of entities to really round out our understanding of what data could be collected and are collected on non-credit. And we are also doing some additional research, trying to understand different state policies that pertain to non-credit data, and also the different governance structures that are relevant there. We're continuing to document practices that states are engaged in working with institutions around their non-credit data. We've already, through our project, have issued some issue briefs that document practices, specific practices around non-credit, like working with data systems, developing partnerships, dashboards, things like that. All of these things are on our website, but we're just, we over the years have been trying to be, a research-based network that brings folks together to tackle some of these difficult issues on non-credit data. We know it's not something that happens immediately over time, and so we've been seeking to provide some resources in that area. So at this point, I want to just turn things over to Mark to share more of all the work that we've been doing on this project, the taxonomy, and then really get into some of the really important key questions about relevance to Workforce Pell and how we hope to help inform that conversation.
Thanks, Michelle, and I want to thank Steve and ACCT for having us today, and appreciate everyone who has logged in to learn more about the project and be thinking about Workforce Pell with us. So one of the first things that we typically do as a part of our project with our state research partners is ask why. Why are they interested in looking at their data, improving their data, collecting good data? And ultimately we found a number of the things that you'll see here on the screen. One is, just wanting to make sure that their data collection is consistent, wanting to collect outcomes data to show the value for individuals to the state, capture the full mission. Part of that is making sure that there are good data definitions. I think you'll see all of these as we start talking about Workforce Pell as being important. Also thinking about quality. Michelle has created a framework around non-credit and non-credential quality. I think quality is at the heart of everything in terms of thinking about what non-credit offerings can and should be offered and ultimately perhaps funded. And then we've been talking about, our project's been going on for over 4 years, but even in the lead up, we've been talking about potential federal data collection through iPads and Workforce Pell since the very beginning of our project, knowing that both were under discussion, have been under discussion for years. Maybe we thought that iPads would happen before Workforce Pell, but here we are. Workforce Pell passed now, so I think it's become really relevant to this data conversation. And then also states have been thinking about this non-credit to credit articulation, and really difficult to do if you don't have data connected at the very least. I mean, hard to connect programs if you can't even track students. So that's been a part of it as well. So just a little bit more about what we do with our partner states. First thing we do is we take an inventory, help them take an inventory of the data elements at the program level that they capture. And you see a number of those here. You'll see them in a more organized way here in a moment. But everything from outcomes to the way non-credit courses are delivered to the enrollments and student identifiers. And ultimately, we've taken that through 2 phases, 8 states with multiple entities, including, as Michelle said, the New Jersey Department of Labor, sharing some of their program level data too, the data they collect on programs that they fund. And ultimately, we've assembled all this into our non-credit data taxonomy that Michelle has mentioned. This is the second version, so we continue to refine. You'll see we have 4 primary categories: purpose and design. This is basically what the programs do, how long they are. Again, also going to be Workforce Pell relevant. What services are offered to students, what non-degree credentials are aligned with those programs, and then the outcomes data. The labor market outcomes, academic outcomes, do students complete, not complete, and what credentials do students earn ultimately, all the enrollment and demographics, which seem to be, if you come from the credit side of the house, if there are different sides of the house, it seems to be normal that you'd have demographics on everyone, but actually we've seen really high levels of missingness, and that's not been uncommon in terms of student demographics. And then finance and policy, the tuition paid, the funding that supports these types of programs and such. So this is just a sample in our taxonomy document. We will give you a link to our website where you can look at all of our reports. We have a QR code at the end. But we've actually, through our work with states, identified up to 90 different data elements that different states capture, almost like a menu for states that are looking to build out their non-credit data within the different categories of the taxonomy, to think about the type of data that they could capture. And again, also going to be relevant for Workforce Pell and thinking about what each state's specific data needs are. Over time, while we have worked mostly with community colleges, we really want to work with other entities too to round this out over time. Everything from apprenticeship, as Michelle said, to universities, to private training providers and others. So we, along with our taxonomy, have created a how-to guide for how to build out the non-credit data infrastructure. One is doing this inventory that we really work with our partner states on, and some of it is beginning with the essentials and building over time. Figuring out what the priorities are. Maybe that's data to align with the Workforce Pell guardrails right now, because that could be an immediate need, but states have other needs as well. Also choosing a data platform that connects for interconnectivity. And along our partner states, we've seen different data systems. One that we share often is Louisiana, who took all of their non-credit and credit and put it all within one data system. They use Banner, and putting it all in one data system creates an environment where tracking those students from non-credit to credit can exist. So that's just one use case example. Also, the importance of building data partnerships, and I'll mention that in a minute. And then also thinking about the statewide and national data ecosystems and how important they are to filling out some of those data. So one of the data elements that we capture is where the funding comes from. We've seen everything from state enrollment-based funding in some states to some elements of performance-based funding. More and more states have special initiative funding. And if you've seen HCM's great work on different state data sources to support workforce education, you've seen some of those. Some states have done need-based aid, and even one state, Iowa, has some need-based aid for wraparound student support because non-credit students are students. So that really leads us into Workforce Pell, potentially filling a gap for for some non-credit programs potentially, having a federal level need-based program to support this type of education. So just a quick overview of Workforce Pell, some of the basics. I do encourage everyone to read that portion of the legislation. It's not that long actually, but we did try to summarize it here. So some of the basics. Workforce Pell is need-based aid for students who attend programs at accredited institutions. They need to be at least 150 contact hours and 8 weeks in length. Eligible students meet the general Pell criteria. One difference is that students who have earned a baccalaureate degree can also qualify. So that's a little bit different than regular Pell. It's set to begin on July 1st. The negotiated rulemaking process to try to map out what some of this looks like in terms of implementation is set to begin on December 8th. With 2 different phases to both December and January. Hopefully we'll be learning more about that soon and perhaps even seeing some proposals of what those rules could look like. And then I think what so many are concerned with are the series of guardrails. There is the series of guardrails rather that that's required in order for short-term courses and programs to be eligible for students to enroll in using Workforce Pell funds. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the guardrails a bit. So one is that it can't be a correspondence course, although my understanding is, online courses are going to be fine. The governor needs to verify within each state that the program is aligned with high skill, high wage, or in-demand areas. And the legislation refers to Perkins and the way that is done. So that'll really key into state priorities as well as those in-demand jobs for a state. The offerings, courses, programs need to match employer hiring criteria. There have to be credentials associated with them that are stackable and portable. It is if an exception to them being stackable and portable is that if there's only one credential for a particular occupation, then that one program related to that one credential can potentially qualify. Here's one that I know institutions of higher ed are looking at really closely, especially when they're considering non-credit courses, is that these courses and programs need to ultimately result in credit. So it takes that non-credit to credit articulation piece and puts it into, a very specific requirement here. So I think colleges and systems that have been thinking about credit for prior learning or articulation from non-credit to credit in some other way will be perhaps more ready to do some of that with their programs. Each of these offerings, if approved, will need to have been offered for at least 1 year. I think one of the questions, something that I would like to see over time, is whether existing programs, if shorter than 150 hours, are potentially clustered to 150 or more. Will that be permitted? I certainly don't have the answer to that right now, but it's a question that I've been hearing and I've received over time. So I think that's something to think about. And then each of these programs that would ultimately be approved has to have a completion rate of 70% or higher within 150% of the program's normal time period. I'm not sure exactly, what 150% of normal time means in the non-credit space. I think that's often, applied to like an associate degree or a baccalaureate degree, 2-year, 4-year sort of thing. So I think the thing I've really been thinking about there is the 70% completion rate. Along whatever time period, number of weeks it's been established to be in that course. Post-completion job placement rate of 70% or higher, 180 days following completion. So that really leans into some of those labor market outcomes data. And then ultimately a value-added earnings calculation that it looks at costs and earnings over time. And that is a 3-year in the language. So that's a little bit of an overview. One of the things that we have done is thought about some guiding questions in terms of our project and these guardrails as states are thinking about and colleges are thinking about what to do leading up to Workforce Pell implementation. So number one is current non-credit offerings within colleges and states align with some of these workforce Pell parameters, some of these guardrails? Number two, how well equipped is the state data infrastructure to do some pre-identification of non-credit offerings for workforce Pell? That's something that colleges and states can be doing right now, even before we know all the rules. I think we have enough information in the guardrails to be doing that pre-planning. And then thirdly, how should community colleges and state systems, be preparing? And that's, taking some of these data inventories, matching their data with the guardrails and such, all linked to that pre-planning process. So along that first question, one is alignment, and I know folks maybe outside of the community college world or not as familiar with non-credit. I know there are a lot of thoughts out there about what non-credit is. Quite frankly, non-credit, so often what Michelle and I have learned over time working and talking with folks in so many states is that non-credit very much matches the mission of community colleges and technical colleges within their service areas. They use it for whatever they need to meet their mission. What we have found with our partner states so far, and you see in the blue and the green, is that most states are using non-credit primarily for the occupational and sponsored contract training. Now, we do have some states that maybe have more within their purview adult education to include more, either whether it's developmental ed or GED prep or other ESL, other things that we would put into our pre-college category. But there is a misperception in some places that there's a lot of personal interest type courses, more of those community interest courses. And that is offered in some places, and that fulfills the mission of community colleges in many ways. But with our state partners, we haven't seen that in a lot of states. Largely, we are seeing mostly those occupationally oriented courses, which could potentially be in line or are aligned with the premise behind Workforce Pell, which is to prepare the workforce through shorter term programs. So we see some alignment and a lot of really positive alignment there, which is a good step. Now I know it's a lot of numbers. I'm going to try to narrow this down a bit. One of the things is thinking about contact hours. So as we work with our partner states and we look at their program level data, with one exception, the Tennessee TCAT, that have a few very specialized programs that are quite long. Generally, we see median program length for non-credit occupationally oriented programs being between 15 and 100 hours. So, that's the median. I will mention on the high end is Virginia Fast Forward. Programs eligible, non-credit programs eligible for the Virginia Fast Forward program and that funding all have to be aligned with an industry recognized credential. And I think that really contributes to those courses and programs being a little bit longer on average than some others. You'll see those that aren't fast forward or an average just 15 hours. But across the other states, 20, 25, up to 40 hours. So, what that tells us is that the majority of non-credit courses and programs being offered by at least our state partners aren't going to meet that 150 credit hour threshold. So, if strictly based on that, do I envision the floodgates really opening toward Workforce Pell with current offerings? I mean, not necessarily, again, unless there is the ability to cluster some of those programs into really coherent groupings of courses and such for that lead to credentials. So I think that's something to think about, and perhaps one of the first things that we would advise states and colleges to be doing is looking at the length of some of those programs that lead to credentials and see what potentially qualifies. The other one, and I'll skip over some of the delivery pieces, but looking over on the right, for states that even have data, and I should mention this, take a quick step back. We think about the guardrails. We're working with 8 states, many of which have what we would characterize as pretty good, like really good non-credit data, maybe comparatively. And while all the states pretty much that we're working with, they're going to have the contact hour data. It's really only about half of states that we've worked with so far that are already matching their labor market data in terms of employment and earnings, as well as credential data, which are at times elusive. To their non-credit data. So, so what you see here with the NAs are that we have a number of states among our partners, and I know there are many other states out there that maybe don't even have all of the data to align with credentials. Now, one caveat here is that we are working with state level data. And we realize that colleges that maybe work directly with employers or work with credential issuing organizations could have different and more robust data, at the college level. But we also realize that state entities play an important role in helping to align with credential and labor market outcome data across systems. So a little caveat there, just knowing that we're showing program level data that are captured at the state level. But when looking at the certification data, even for states that have and are able to match with some programs with certification data, it's not like all programs lead to certifications and credentials and such. So all of this to say that even though there are a lot of states with data, maybe not all of the data needed to robustly at the state level do that pre-identification for Workforce Pell, but that leads to potential action items. Anyhow, I want to talk a little bit more about some of these labor market data and credential data that I was alluding to. So we know from a survey that the team conducted of 30 states that about 25% had at least some industry certification data connected with non-credit. So that means the majority don't, and I think that's something to be thinking about. 58% without certification data indicated plans to expand. I think as we encounter more and more states through our national learning community, in addition to data through this project, we see a tremendous appetite to, number one, increase and improve the amount of data collected on non-credit or continuing education within community colleges, but also to connect with the labor market data, credential data. We know that initiatives like CredLens that are working to compile those data and really assist states in matching the data to credentials, that provides a potential solution over time. And there are other initiatives, as you see here on the slide. So these are the first 3 states in our project that all have robust non-credit data. And we've just listed out some of the partnerships that they have within their states and how important they are. And you'll see that each of them has a partnership with their state workforce agency for the employment and wage data. But then you'll also see additional partnerships. Oh, and I should also mention they all have partnerships with the National Student Clearinghouse to look at additional post-secondary enrollment data that they're able to match with their non-credit data as well. A lot of that has to do with collecting identifiers. But you'll also see many other partnerships here across the states to try to match with state licensure. Iowa is a great example. So they partner with their Department of Inspection and Appeals for CNA licensing. They partner with their Department of Public Health for other health occupation licensing, their Department of Transportation for commercial driver's licensing. So they can track for those related programs within their state's community colleges. They're able to track which programs, ultimately which students are earning those credentials. And those are the types of data that will be really helpful when it comes to Workforce Pell and being able to ensure that programs are aligned with those industry recognized credentials that are stackable and portable and important to those guardrails. And again, you can see some other examples here. And I know Michelle mentioned this, and I will give the QR code, but I should mention that on each of our states, even though we do cross-state reports, we have reports on each individual state where you can really read about the policy context and more nuanced discussions of things like some of these partnerships that they have. Okay, so back to the data. data infrastructure, and you can see this across many of the data elements. So basically, what we've done with the 80 or 90 data elements that we have, we've looked along the categories of our taxonomy: purpose and design, outcomes, demographics and enrollment, and finance and policy. And we've pulled some of the data elements that are directly associated with Workforce Pell. And you'll see more of the availability across here. So again, contact hours, no problem. Course and program name, zip codes, as they're helpful to understand the field of the programs. But then when you get to associated non-degree credentials, only about half of our partner states, only about half in terms of being able to track students to credit right now. Again, this is state level data, not that colleges can't potentially do this as well. Completion data, the same, and then the labor market outcomes. Pre-enrollment employment and post-enrollment employment, same with salary, wage, industry certifications, and licensure and such, about half of our partner states. All that to say, there are gaps to fill. And so if you're with a college or a state that needs to fill those gaps, know that you're not alone. And we really hope that some of what we do within our project can help you identify some of those data elements and think about ways to partner to get some of those. And part of that too is going to be the demographics and enrollment, in terms of identifiers, social security numbers being potentially important, especially to match some of those data, names, birth dates, and such. And here's one of the things at the state level too, and this will be important for that value add calculation, is that very few, actually, I think we only had 2 states capturing any of those tuition data at the state level. Again, our assumption would be that those data are captured at the institution level, but in terms of trying to have some statewide coordinated efforts to help with some of these pre-identification calculations, a lot of those data don't occur at the state level. So ultimately, our recommendations, again, we just ran through some of the inventory of where states generally are in terms of those state data and our partners. But our recommendations include: 1, mapping your data to the guardrails now, like I just tried to do on that previous slide for our partner states. Again, we hope that the data taxonomy might help with some of that. We also, we will be doing, some things with states, and we have already discussed this some with our learning community to bring states together. So we encourage that sharing among states as well. Okay, number 2, to review current offerings for quality, connection to credentials, maybe considering, combining courses and programs into programs of value. Again, we don't know if that will be permitted, but thinking about stackability of those credentials. And then embracing the broader ecosystem. And in these requirements, there are different groups that are involved. One is, some of these data are captured at the college level, state level, as we've shown in the state findings. But in terms of verifications of these programs and linking to high skill, high wage, and demand, in the legislation, those are under the purview of the governor or the governor's appointed agencies. So our recommendation would be for community colleges to be talking with the workforce system and state government in your state immediately to start thinking about processes for doing this type of work, to do this pre-identification and be ready for these rules when released from the negotiated rulemaking process. And also, I believe through this pre-identification process, looking at the guardrails as they stand in the legislation, it will give you a sense to some potential recommendations to make as the regs are drafted, and if there are open comment periods after the regs are written. So I'm sure the government relations folks will know more about how to do that over time, but I would potentially start making notes about what can be done or what is difficult to do and how that can be done. The QR code here on this slide is to a specific article about Workforce Pell that Michelle and I wrote, and a lot of what we have in the presentation is also included in that, with a little bit more discussion about supporting research and stuff and such rather. So we would welcome you to look at that, and then also. Not to overly code you at the end of the talk here, but this one will take you to our project website, where if you're from a state that would like to participate in the learning community, that learning community is open to everyone. Michelle mentioned that we also have the state working groups, which are state folks who are wrestling and are in the weeds with data right now. So that one is more focused on state data people primarily, but we would invite anyone interested in engaging with other states to the learning community, where we do sessions and such, and there's an opportunity to chime in and ask questions. Then also you can get connected to our data taxonomy and how-to guide if that's something that's of interest to you, and we would always encourage you, if you had questions beyond today's session, to reach out. We'd be curious to hear from you, and get your thoughts and respond to any questions that you had. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Steve.
Thanks, Mark and Michelle. I mean, that was some serious information there, and some very important things, I think, to talk about. Just a reminder to the audience, feel free to put any questions you have into the chat. We have some time left to answer those. There were a couple of comments that came in, or one comment and then one question. Is one of the comments was around colleges, when you talked about tracking or looking at data that showed how many students actually went from non-credit to credit. And that, part of the reason for that low number might be that colleges are not very good at tracking that information. And so I didn't know if you had any thoughts around like why that might be, if that's a factor. And then if you had any thoughts around like what are some solutions would the information that you're putting together with this non-credit data project help colleges do that very thing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to get started. And if Michelle, would you like to
Either way.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that we've done, and it's a great question. I mean, we know that there's a reason why non-credit's been called the hidden college in literature for a long time, and a lot of that is that non-credit and credit often exist organizationally in different parts within an institution, with the data not necessarily housed in the same data system. And so I know that's one of the challenges. We know that colleges track non-credit data in everything from the single student information system down to Excel spreadsheets and report them up, and everything in between. And so so we know that there are challenges, a lot of it around infrastructure, but a lot of it also around organization. And that's something that Michelle has written about in the past. Institutions in some states are moving to a one college model that brings some of that together, that I think is an interesting strategy for bringing all education potentially together and foster some of those connections. But one of the things specific to the data project is that when we did release a brief on this around data systems and what that looks like for non-credit, and part of that is trying to find ways, at least for those data systems, to talk, if not to include them in one data system. So Michelle, I'm not sure if you have anything that you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think if I understand the question also was whether the research findings might be explained by the sort of problems with the data. And I would just say that the findings that I was referring to are very specific sorts of research projects where great effort was made to try and link the sort of non-credit to credit data within college, and I think in one instance within a state. And so those, I think, probably give us the best estimates or sort of insights on the state of the field. Not to say that there might not be mistakes in those data, and certainly that those connections might not be perfect, but they do give us some sense that the numbers are fairly small, maybe even single digits in some cases. But that begs the question of what's going on there. Why is that the case? And more data will help us better understand and diagnose that and figure out what's going on. And maybe will help us get better numbers to work on that further. But I think it's a really, really important question. Some of the research that we've done on how students navigate and make decisions also might help to, make some sense of if those numbers are truly as low as some of those data might tell us, maybe there's some other issues here. Maybe there's a need for more student supports. As Mark mentioned, very few states have resources to help students navigate programs and student supports and things like that. So, that could also be another factor there. But I think that's definitely an area, for a lot more investigation and just examination and reflection to understand what's really happening and to build up our knowledge and improve systems.
Thanks for that. So we had some other questions come in, but I guess one thing I want to just remind the audience of is this is being recorded. We will share the link out for this presentation. And Michelle, is it okay? Can we include the slide deck in that, or are we able to send that out as well?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
One of the questions that came in is around that 1 year of existence factor. But there was discussion around that a 3-year look back. And so I'm not sure how, the question is how that worked for programs that are less than 3 years old. I think I'm not sure that they're going to start that look back right away is what I'm interpreting that is, but I don't know if you guys had any thoughts around that.
I know that I've had a lot of conversations with people about that. That's something that we don't know. And it is one of those things that when you look at the guardrails, doesn't look congruent, right? I mean, I think the idea that the programs need to have, been in existence for a year means that the other guardrails in terms of the 70% completion and then also the job placement at 180 days out should be able to be calculated. But right, that look back in terms of the value add calculation is a 3-year. And the programs only have to be a year old. So, I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know what the rules will ultimately look like. I would imagine that, that one of those, solutions could be to hold off on that one. But I think we're going to know more once that first draft comes out. But that's frankly the one that maybe has the most teeth, in terms of ensuring quality and value. And it's also probably going to be the most difficult one to calculate. So I think if there is one particular one to watch, and it's that one because there's perhaps the most ambiguity around that value add calculation right now. So that's a little bit of a non-answer, but but I do think that's one that we need to pay really close attention to.
No, I agree. And I think it's important to remember that some of these we cannot answer and we are just speculating, because I think once rulemaking happens, then we're going to have much more concrete information and guidelines to go by. And so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but at the same time, we don't want to just sit back and say, well, we're just going to wait. We don't even want to prepare ourselves. And so another area that you did mention is around that the courses are allowed to be online. And I know that there was some discussion like correspondence courses won't necessarily qualify, but online courses, I think if they fall within the parameters that are going to be outlined, that online courses would be okay. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
That would be my understanding, and I think a lot of that may be then connected to the institutional accreditation piece and such. I mean, so I think that's another one to look at, but I have not heard of that really being a concern right now. I will mention that I don't know the specific definition. I think there is a definition for correspondence course that I frankly haven't looked up to see the differences. I'm not sure if if ACCT or others have looked at that one yet, or Michelle, if you have any sense of what the difference is, but I haven't heard that to be a major area of concern, but it might be when we see the rules.
Right. And again, that's yeah, a lot of this is speculating. There was a quick question that you addressed part of in your talk around length of programs in weeks and hours. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, the Workforce Pell, some of the guardrails are they have to be between 150 and 599 hours and between 8 and 15 weeks. Is that, I just want to make sure everyone.
That is correct, because
Okay.
600 hours and 15 weeks or
Right.
more are already included in Pell. But yes, so it is 150 hours and 8 weeks.
Correct.
So
Yes.
yeah, not one or the other.
Right. There's a question in there. This is I think going to be again, it's going to be tough to answer before rulemaking happens, but there's a question around professional credentials that people can obtain after their bachelor's, a lot, like the AWS, like the Google, the Apple certifications, that potentially could qualify for this type of funding. It is, I guess it all depends on how it's packaged. So it's not necessarily the type of credential, as long as it falls within those guidelines, but it's more about if it falls within the guidelines, then it falls within the guidelines. There's not we're not trying to weed out specific types of certifications necessarily. I don't know if that made sense to you, but I was trying to reframe the question.
Yeah, I don't know if Michelle, if you wanted to chime in on credentials, yeah.
I think I see where you're going with that. I mean, it's a really interesting question, I suppose, and I think it's maybe that's a kind of a question for folks like those on this webinar to be thinking about. The guidelines are as they are, the guardrails are as they are. Rulemaking is going to go ahead as it goes ahead, but it seems like there is a bit of an opportunity and room for sort of figuring out how to work with what we have right now. And, it might be the opportunity, to keep it open for these kinds of credential opportunities if that's what institutions think is going to be meaningful to students and learners, and that's what people need. And, I think in that example, that may be the case. But it seems like there's a little bit of sort of creativity, I suppose, in interpreting some of this and figuring out how to work with it. And seeing how it goes and seeing if that process can be influenced as well. So it's a really good question, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And there was another question specific to Iowa's data. The non-credit programming was through their 260E program. I'm not familiar with that, but does that ring a bell? No? Okay.
I'm not sure what 260E is. So yeah, but I'm sorry. I wish I could give an answer on that.
Now, where is Paula?
Yeah, exactly. Our partners.
We have a lot of great state partners.
And from your interpretation, this question is around lifetime Pell eligibility. How does Workforce Pell factor into that? And my understanding is it factors into the maximum amount. So it's a combination of the two. It's not you get Pell and then you get Workforce Pell on top of that. It's all bundled into the same maximum eligibility calculation.
Yes, it is. And that's a bit of a risk. I mean, it's a consideration that everybody needs to be aware of, for sure. And students need to be aware of that.
Oh, so someone clarified the Iowa question. It's the Industrial New Jobs Training 260E program. Are you familiar with that?
So I know that one doesn't. That's a good question. I know as we worked with Iowa on their program level data that they identified a series of programs and they had several different funding mechanisms. So I wouldn't be surprised if that one was among the special initiative workforce funding. A lot of what we do as a part of our project is that we take these funding streams and we recategorize them to try to compare states across each other. And that was that one slide that we had, state workforce development, special initiative funding, the wraparound services, et cetera. So I'm I'm not positive. We could have something about that in the individual state report, but we could always connect someone that has questions with our research partners in Iowa if there are additional questions on that.
Yes, and I think we can, I think we can definitely, we'll make sure that if there are lingering questions that are in the chat, that we do our best to, answer those. So do you have any thought there? So there was a question just came in around the kinds of non-credit programs or offerings that might be harder to classify under this taxonomy, such as like workforce training or personal interest or remediation. Do you have any thoughts on like how those categories might be easier or harder to classify under your taxonomy? Is it, sorry, who asked that question? Is it around the taxonomy for Workforce Pell, or is it around the State Noncredit Data taxonomy? So Workforce Pell.
Yeah, so I mean, I can get started, and maybe Michelle wants to chime in too. I think when you look at the guardrails, you're going to be pre-identifying, ultimately trying to identify programs that are associated with credentials that lead to high skill, high wage, in demand jobs as certified by the governor. That ultimately are articulating into credit. I think we probably wouldn't see many of those personal interest type courses doing that. So even though we, as a part of our project, would use this typology to categorize the classes, I think the key is really looking at those guardrails to see which of the offerings are associated with the criteria, the high skill, high wage, the stackable, portable credentials that have, positive labor market outcomes, and such. So even though we categorize them in one way, I think the guardrails really will help to clarify which of those would potentially qualify.
No, thanks for that. And that's kind of along the same lines that we are interpreting it as well. And I think that is going to bring us to the end. And I want to thank Michelle, you and Mark again for that great information. You can see that it generated a lot of questions, and I appreciate everyone's patience with the questions, trying to either reframe them or have our panelists understand what I'm saying. And again, we will be sending this recording out. We will be sending the slide deck out. We will try to answer any questions that we did not get to. And just so you know, we will have additional webinars coming up around both the State Noncredit Data Initiative, and also ACCT is hosting a series around how to prepare for Workforce Pell in some different categories. And so with that, thank you guys very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.